More offseason musings coming up for the Tampa Bay Lightning, like how to avoid another first-round playoff exit, who the Bolts might get for Isaac Howard, and talking about how I feel about some of the Lightning's top-line players compared to the beginning of the season. Welcome to another offseason edition of Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Josh Sperber here, thanking all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if your team is the Tampa Bay Lightning, then this is the show for you. And today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. And before the first year of Isaac Howard, he is a name that the Lightning have already slightly alluded to, talking about trading. The Lightning's GM, Julien Brisebois, mentioned at exit interviews that it was at the moment of the exit interviews a couple weeks ago, unlikely that the Lightning would come to an agreement with Isaac Howard, their first-round draft pick in 2022, the reigning Hobey Baker Award winner, and an absolute star at Michigan State. Seemed like a bargain for the Lightning in the late first round of 2022, especially with how much he's progressed. But now his future with Tampa Bay is a little bit uncertain. And the Lightning might be forced to trade him because if he doesn't sign with the Bolts before the end of August in 2026, then he is free to sign with another NHL team. So the Lightning might have to just go and make a trade and give up Isaac Howard to a young team looking for a star forward. And I think it's hard to really say specific players that could potentially be involved in this because, you know, it's still the Stanley Cup playoffs. You don't really know who's exactly on the trade block right now. It's all really conjecture on who might be traded. But with Isaac Howard, I think the Lightning are going to need to get someone who is already at the very least, top 9 player. They need to get at least one player that can fact into the Lightning roster, ideally on offense for Isaac Howard, maybe a first-round pick as well. I know the Lightning's main need in terms of depth right now is absolutely on their defensive side. But giving up a guy like Isaac Howard is trading away some of the Lightning future. I mean, the Lightning have to think of Isaac Howard until the literal second that the Lightning are forced to trade him away. They've got to think of Isaac Howard as a key player, a key building block for the Lightning franchise to build future contenders. Is there a team that has just finished their acceptance with anything other than a Stanley Cup season? Honestly, I think that's how every team in sport should go about it. You know, if you don't win the championship, what's the point of playing? You know, it's not like you get a participation trophy or anything like that. The Lightning are a team that has forged themselves into championship contenders. That is typically something that can happen for the Lightning, typically something that seems possible for Tampa Bay year in and year out. That's certainly been the way it has been for the last couple of years, at least during the sellout streak that Tampa has had. And looking at Isaac Howard's collegiate resume, he has to be worth at least one NHL player. I mean, I'm not saying, they're going to flip him to the Blackhawks for Connor Bedard or something like that, or either Macklin Celebrini or Will Smith from the Sharks or a young player like that. But I definitely think it's feasible for the Lightning to get at least one, borderline top 6 offensive player out of a guy like Isaac Howard. I think draft picks are certainly going to be a bit easier to come by, especially for someone who, yes, is dominated in college, but not a lot of scouts can equate that as well with potential dominance once the guy gets to the NHL. A lot of things can change. I mean, year in, year out, you see guys that absolutely crush it in NCAA hockey or, any kind of, somewhat amateur, not exactly pro level hockey, guys that star in some of the smaller leagues, but don't pan out when it comes to the NHL. And there's still a possibility that Isaac Howard could be that. I mean, everything that he's shown in NCAA hockey makes it seem like he can be a generational kind of player. But I think that there are some teams that aren't going to buy into that hype when it comes to trading some of their existing players, prospect, draft picks, what have you, because the Lightning can and should command a big haul for the Hobey Baker Award winner. And honestly, there's a part of me that even thinks that this might be something the Lightning want to jump on sooner rather than later, because you don't know what's going to happen in Isaac Howard's next season at Michigan State. You don't know that people are going to take into account how strong his Hobey Baker year was if he comes out and falls flat in his senior season at Michigan State. That's a possibility, and it's something that I think the Lightning have to account for if they really think that it's unlikely that Isaac Howard will sign with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I still think that there's some wiggle room. I still think there's a chance for the Lightning to keep Isaac on their roster, but it definitely has to be in consideration that he might not be on the Lightning roster in 2026. That has to be considered a possibility if Julien Brisebois came out and said something that big, dropped that kind of a bombshell during the exit interviews at the end of the season. So it's certainly a possibility. And I think that you're looking at a solid play, at least one solid top six defender, top four defender, top six offensive player, maybe a mid-round draft pick, and some smaller, lesser known guys or something like that for Isaac Howard. But I think especially coming off of the Hobey Baker Award, the Lightning certainly can command a sizable offer for a guy like Isaac Howard if they have to end up pulling that trigger. I still think that the Lightning should do everything they possibly can to keep him on the team. If it, involves selling off a couple guys, making some trades just to get the cap room ready. Because frankly, I think that has to have been the main thing precluding Isaac Howard from joining the Crunch and the Lightning at the end of this 2024-25 season. But, a lot of scouts view Isaac Howard as an NHL-ready prospect, and that's certainly the case with the players in the Lightning front office. But, the fact is the Lightning might not have room for him. So these kind of trade situations are things that the Lightning might just have to start thinking about. And, I think if they can get a defenseman, someone who can contribute right now as a top four defenseman, then that would be great. But I think a realistic expectation for a guy like Isaac Howard is going to be a high to mid-level draft pick, a couple extra mid-round draft picks, and then, a top two line guy on offense or defense. It doesn't have to be. I'm not saying that, the Pittsburgh Penguins should just give up Sidney Crosby for Isaac Howard. I'm not saying that it's an established superstar kind of player. It's not like Isaac Howard's going to go to the Maple Leafs in exchange for Austin Matthews and some cash considerations or something like that. The Lightning, I think, can definitely add to some of their depth, but just the way that a lot of these kind of prospect trades have been going, it's really been draft picks for prior draft selections or something like that. And I don't know if there's necessarily a ceiling. I think the ceiling is really a couple of first-round picks and, an established veteran on the offensive side of things. I think teams would be a lot more hesitant to give up an established defender for a rookie on the offensive side like Isaac Howard would be. So I think a top six offensive player and a couple draft picks might be what the Lightning are looking at for Isaac Howard. And there are certainly plenty of teams that could be willing to pay that price. But it's definitely just something that you're going to want to keep in the back of your head, because that, I think, is going to be a story that defines the off-ice portion of the offseason and the upcoming Tampa Bay Lightning season in 2025 and 2026. And something else the Lightning have to be thinking about heading into next season is improving in the postseason. The Lightning have not had a strong record over the last few postseason series since those back-to-back championships, since that loss to the Avalanche in 2022. The postseason play for the Lightning has been on the downturn, and whether it's adding new players or some existing players in the system stepping up, the Lightning are going to need to make some changes to become a true Stanley Cup contender. And we'll talk about that when we return here on Locked On Lightning. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter, save more, and I cook a lot more too. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the extra stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year with Monarch Money. And the burning question, I feel like, for this Tampa Bay Lightning offseason is addressing just another first-round exit against the Florida Panthers. And I really think that's what made it sting so much. Just each of the past two seasons going out to the biggest rival that the Lightning have, the other hockey team in Florida, any way you want to say it, going out to a rival squad like that is going to hurt more than if it was Lightning losing to, say, the Maple Leafs or the Red Wings in the first round. It just hurts that much more when it's a team like the Panthers that the Lightning already have some bad blood against. And I think the first issue that the Lightning need to address is the physicality. I think that adding another defenseman, ideally another veteran, one of the free agent defensemen, guys like Gavrikov, like Alec Martinez, some of the older players that might not be commanding as much of a contract because the Lightning don't have that kind of flexibility with the salary cap going into this offseason. And I think the physicality of the series, definitely at the beginning, of course, some of those extra hits from Florida were a little bit on the dirtier side, but I think just whether if it's a two-way forward, just, a large man who plays forward, or just an extra veteran defenseman, I think the Lightning certainly need a bit more of a physical presence on their team, a guy who can kind of add that physicality a little bit more naturally, because frankly, that's just not how the Lightning play their game. I mean, the Lightning they have guys who can bang. They've got guys who can mix it up, drop the gloves, whatever, if they want to. But, I mean, this is a Tampa Bay Lightning team that relies a lot more on their speed, their quickness, their athleticism than their physical play. So I think adding another physical defenseman would certainly be a big help. They also, something that is going to be another big talking point as we approach the start of the season, as the season goes on, is some of the young guys are going to have to step up, because a lot of the players that you'd want the Lightning to get, I mean, Gavrikov might be out of their price range. Guys like Ivan Provorov, who's on an expiring contract, a young, solid top four defenseman that could certainly help the Lightning. A lot of those big name free agents, a lot of those kind of instantly helpful free agent signings might just be out of the Lightning price range. It'll have nothing to do with the fact, Lightning being a better or worse destination to play than some other playoff team, whatever it is. But the fact that the Lightning are right up against the ceiling of the salary cap is going to be a major factor over the course of preseason and the offseason and the starts of the season. So, whether you like it or not, the Lightning's splashy moves might be a bit limited. And if that ends up being the case, which frankly I see as the likely outcome, guys like Max Crozier are going to have to step up. Declan Carlisle, if they bring back Steven Santini for an NHL deal, some of the players that played most or all of this past season in the AHL are going to have to go to the Tampa Bay roster to start the season if the Lightning make some of the moves that I'd expect them to make, or that their salary cap ceiling might force them to make. And, that might mean passing on re-signing a guy like Nick Perbix, a guy who's been a solid veteran presence on the defensive side of things for Tampa Bay, in favor of a guy like Max Crozier, who's been grinding his way through the AHL, been working his way up to the Lightning roster. But, just the simple fact that the salary cap exists in the NHL makes that a lot more complicated. So they're going to need a lot more situations with guys like, of similar events, similar development progressions of guys like Gage Gonzalez. They're going to need some more of those kind of breakout rookies when it comes to this season. And I think, or this next season, if and hopefully when the Lightning get back to the playoffs. That's certainly going to stay the expectation for Tampa, no matter what happens in the offseason. The Lightning are going to be a team that their staff, their fans, their players expect postseason hockey year in and year out. So the Lightning are going to have to, rely on some of those young guys to help them get there. And they also are just going to have to rely on a simple turn of luck. The Lightning got some bad injuries towards the end of the year. Oliver Bjorkstrand was really missed in the postseason, and you go up and down the Lightning's top couple of lines, and just about everyone was playing banged up. And even Julian Breezeball acknowledged in the exit interviews that that's probably something that every team in the NHL postseason is dealing with. And the Lightning certainly aren't. I'm not going to say that the Lightning are the only team that came into, their first round series, especially the later couple of games, with a bunch of injuries, because that's just simply not true. But I think that the Lightning had enough injuries to enough key players that hamper their chances against a team that they played well enough for the most part to beat over the course of that postseason. I mean, the first loss, maybe not. They certainly had their chances in the loss at home, that 4-2 loss after the win in Miami. I mean, I think if you look at those 5-game series, the only one that I can easily say that, all right, this is just a loss that the Lightning are going to have to eat, was game 1. Every other game in that series, the Lightning were in it. And they were close enough to the Panthers, and obviously, horseshoes, hand grenades, in the grand scheme of things, being close doesn't change the fact that it was still a disappointing loss in the series. It was still a disappointing end to the season. But the point is, the Lightning were close enough that if they have guys like Oliver Bjorkstrand in the lineup, Victor Hedman fully healthy, Cirelli able to skate comfortably on both of his legs, they had enough injuries that you could tell it really hurt the quality of play for Tampa Bay in the postseason. And in the situations where you've seen time and time again in the regular season, the Lightning just storm back from a time when their backs are against the wall and get themselves back into the game by playing hard. That couldn't happen as much because the injuries, the fatigue had taken too much of a toll on the Tampa Bay Lightning players. And that became very evident as the season wore on. Some of the dirty hits from the Panthers definitely affected this, but I think, a lot of it was just, tough injuries at the wrong time for Tampa Bay. And, all those definitely affected that first round series against the Panthers. And the health thing is something that is a lot more difficult to control. But, for a Tampa Bay Lightning team, getting a couple more guys from the AHL to make an instant impact isn't that far fetched. Getting some, some more physical presence from the free agency pool isn't that far fetched. And there are definitely things the Lightning can do in this offseason that can put them on the road to success if and when they make the playoffs in 2025. And for our last segment of the day, we're going to go higher or lower, talking about me feeling better about these Lightning players on the Lightning's first line. So defense, goalie, and offense. We're going to go higher or lower on how they improved over the course of the season. So, it's hard to establish kind of a baseline other than just me telling you. So I'm just going to get right into this. We're going to start with the Lightning offense, and we're going to go with the first lines, go from left to right, beginning with Jake Guentzel. And this is the easiest hire that I think I'm going to be able to say in this whole round, because Guentzel was a guy who had been a part of some really talented lines over the course of his NHL career. Just played a huge role in a Hurricanes playoff run, played a big role in a Stanley Cup playoff run early in his career with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. But he wasn't really viewed as a star, maybe not even as one of the elite, top handful of forwards in the entire NHL. And after this season, after the effect that he had on Tampa Bay, it's hard not to see him as one of the best players in the entire league. It seemed a shoo-in for him to go to Four Nations. You listen to the Lightning locker room back in, I think, November when these rosters were getting finalized. Everyone seemed confident that Jay Guentzel was going to represent America and he wasn't getting bombarded with questions, but there was a lot of uncertainty about guys like Anthony Cirelli and Brandon Hagel who had really played their way onto the roster. Guentzel did as well, but him being 30 years old and, more of a veteran in this league, I think had already established himself as, an inevitable part of that Team USA roster. And especially after the Four Nations tournament, where he was one of the leaders in goals and points on Team USA, it's hard not to see Jake Guentzel as an absolute superstar. So he might have had the biggest change in terms of, how much higher I am on Guentzel from the start of the season to right now. Part of it is just the unknown factor, the, fact that he's switched teams so many times in 2024. But I'm definitely all in on Jake Guentzel as being, the next pillar of the Tampa Bay Lightning franchise. And one of those other pillars is Brayden Point, who was kind of established as a star and just really on the guy that he is just a lot more low key, a lot more soft spoken, a lot quieter. And, he might have the salary, he might have the minutes, he might have the pedigree of a bona fide superstar in the NFL, in the NHL, consistently, putting up elite levels in terms of points. Another 40-goal season for him this year. Each of the past 3 years, he's put up over 40 goals, over 40 assists, and over 80 points for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But, he's just a quieter kind of player, and that's something that I really respect about him. I think he's definitely still gone higher on my list from the start of the season than from now as compared to the start of the season. I think it's a lot more clear that Brayden Point is one of the better centers in the NHL, is one of the better players. But I just don't think it's as drastic as an improvement of Jake Guentzel, because for Brayden Point, we've seen in the playoffs, and it's just been more of the same. He's just been that consistent in the regular season. And I think the same can be said about Nikita Kucherov as well. And this might be the biggest surprise, the hottest take, whatever you want to call it, of this segment. But I'm actually going to say Kuch is a little bit lower than how I had him. I still think he's the best player in the NHL. I still think he should be a Hart Trophy winner. But, I mean, there are just a couple instances on defense. You know, he definitely tries to go for the home run check quite a bit. And sometimes when you miss that, when you kind of sacrifice your positioning on the ice in terms of, you know, relating to being in between the offensive player and the goal, when you sacrifice that position just to get a shot at a clean poke check to get the puck out and start a fast break, that's a lot of how Kucherov plays defense. And to be fair, he's quite good at the home run check. So many goals of his this season, so many of the Lightning's fast breaks, pretty much any chance that Nikita Kucherov was a part of were created on those home run checks where he puts himself in kind of a win or lose scenario, you know, go for the Lightning or go for the opponent kind of position to get that big check and spark that fast break. That can be a little bit problematic. And I think it also showed in the postseason that, you know, if the Panthers can lock him up, then that can really, you know, be it for the Lightning offense. But I think that Kucherov might still be the best offensive player in the league, but I think he's come a little bit more down to earth than from how I thought of him at the beginning of the season. And Victor Hedman has somehow gone even higher. Once we go to the defense, talking about those top lines for Tampa, I didn't think it was possible for me to think better of Victor Hedman. I mean, he's been one of the best players and people in the NHL since the Lightning drafted him. He does so much on the ice in terms of his defensive ability, transitioning into offense, his leadership, even as an alternate captain. He was just as important of a voice in that locker room as Steven Stamkos was. And now, I mean, it just really solidifies the leadership hierarchy on the Tampa Bay Lightning. And it just seemed from the start of the season that this was a long time coming for Victor Hedman, that this was predetermined, predestined for him to be the next captain of the Tampa Bay Lightning. And he really shined in that role. He had a great season all around, finishes the number 5 point scorer on the Tampa Bay Lightning, and his 66 points were, you know, among the top half in his NHL career. I mean, he really flourished in that captain's role. And I think that, you know, he might still be in the twilight of his career, yes, but I think it just gave him that extra amount of confidence, and it really shows up on the ice. So Hedman definitely rises higher on my list after a great first season as captain. And JJ Moser is maybe the toughest one to adjudicate on this list because it's so different when you come back from a long-term injury like he did. It's difficult to keep the same level of production as you had at the start of the season. But, I mean, offensively, there was a pretty big drop-off. Defensively, it was about the same, but you could just tell that his rhythm had been interrupted. I still think that I'm going to go higher on J.J. Moser. I know I sound like a huge homer just going up higher on just about everybody, but, you know, Moser was really kind of an unknown name and a guy who really stepped into a starting role, but especially since he changed positions, you know, had to overcome a couple obstacles, but he still solidified himself at the top of those Lightning defensive lines. So I'm going to have to go a little bit higher in terms of my perception on him. And it wasn't possible for me to get a higher perception of Andrei Vasilevskiy as we finish things up with the Lightning goalie. I believed at the start of the season he was the best goalie on the planet. I believe now that he's still the best goalie on the planet. But, I mean, you know, I think this really speaks to everyone. If I'm going to have to say anything for Vasi, I'm going to have to go lower just because of that playoff performance. I mean, a lot of those goals weren't his fault, but, you know, it's just with the Panthers scoring as many goals as they did, they in 2 games, the Panthers scored fewer than 4 goals, a 6-2 win, a 6-3 win, and a 4-2 win. But scoring more than 3 goals on a consistent basis is not what you want as a defense. So Vasilevskiy, regardless of Victor Hedman being the captain, Vasilevsky has to be the leader of that defense as a goalie. And, there's only so much he can do from the net, yes, but I have to go just a little bit lower. I still think he's the best goalie on the planet, even if Hellebuck is likely going to win the Vezina. I still think that if I had to pick one goalie for my NHL team, if you asked me this at the start of the season in 2024, I would have said Andrei Vasilevsky. If you ask me again right now, I'll still tell you Andrei Vasilevsky. But a really tough postseason can kind of distort how you feel about a lot of different Lightning players. And, we'll have a little offseason break, but I'll be, very high on Andrei Vasilevsky soon enough. Once I go on a big rant why it should have been Vasi if Hellebuck ends up winning the Vezina Trophy. But that's where we're going to end off tonight. Hope that you enjoyed Locked On Lightning as a start to your week. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen today and every day. Now for your second listen, make sure to check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find Locked On NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please, wherever you found today's podcast, give us a like, subscribe, a follow. We do the show for you, the fans, so we really do appreciate your support. So thank you once again for supporting Locked On Lightning, and please enjoy the start to your week.